A gunslinger bought an infertile Chinese girl for $1. She gave him 6 children in 8 years. The town sat at the edge of a long, dusty road, the kind of place people passed through but rarely chose to stay. Wind carried sand into every corner, and the sun burned the ground until even shadows felt tired. Life there was simple but hard. People woke up early, worked until their bodies ached, and slept with worries they never spoke about. Hope was not something many people trusted. The man lived at the far end of the town, near an old wooden building that once served as a storage house. Most people knew him only by reputation. He was called a gunslinger, though he no longer walked around showing any weapon. His past followed him like a shadow. Some said he had survived things no normal man could. Others believed he was dangerous and cold. Children were told not to stare at him. Adults nodded politely but kept their distance. He did not correct anyone. He had learned long ago that explaining himself changed nothing. Words were weak in a place where survival mattered more than truth. He kept to himself, fixing broken tools for others when they asked, trading small jobs for food and spending long evenings sitting outside, watching the sky turn dark. Loneliness had become a habit, not a pain. Years earlier, he had believed life might give him something more. That belief had been broken slowly, one disappointment at a time. Friends had left or died. Dreams had faded. By the time he reached middle age, he no longer expected kindness or joy. He believed his life was already decided. Work, sleep, repeat, until it ended quietly. In that town, marriage was not always about love. Many people married for survival, for shared work, or simply because being alone was harder. Some arrangements were spoken openly, others whispered about. No one pretended it was perfect. It was just the way life worked there. One afternoon, as the gunslinger repaired a broken fence for a farmer, he overheard 2 men talking nearby. They spoke in low voices but did not hide their words carefully. They talked about a woman who had arrived recently from far away. She was Chinese, an adult woman who had already lived through many struggles. According to them, she had been judged as unable to have children. Because of that label, no one wanted to marry her. In a place where families were important, that single word made her unwanted. The gunslinger did not look up, but the word stayed with him. He had no interest in gossip, yet something about the way they spoke bothered him. They talked about her as if she were an object, something broken and useless. He had heard that tone before, directed at himself many times in the past. Later that evening, he went to the small eating place near the center of town. It was one of the few places where people gathered. He sat alone, as usual, quietly finishing his meal. That was when he saw her for the first time. She sat at a corner table, hands folded, posture straight. Her clothes were plain but clean. Her face showed no fear, only calm attention. She listened more than she spoke. Some people glanced at her with curiosity. Others avoided looking at her at all. She did not seem surprised by any of it. The gunslinger noticed how still she was, how steady her breathing looked. She reminded him of himself in a strange way, someone who had learned to survive by staying quiet and observant. He did not approach her. He did not even stare for long. He finished his food and left. That night he slept poorly. Not because of her, he told himself, but because old memories had returned. He remembered how people once talked about him, how labels had followed him from place to place. Dangerous, broken, not worth trusting. He wondered how many nights she lay awake hearing similar thoughts spoken aloud. A few days later, a man from town approached him with an idea. It was spoken carefully, as if testing the ground. The man explained that the woman needed a husband to secure her place in the town. No one else was willing. The marriage would be simple, practical, and official enough to stop rumors. The price mentioned was $1, a symbol more than payment. The gunslinger listened without interrupting. He did not feel shocked. In that town, such things were not unusual. Still, he felt something twist inside him. Not excitement, not desire, but recognition. This was another life being reduced to a label, another decision made by others without her voice truly heard. "Why me?" he asked. The man hesitated before answering honestly. Because the gunslinger had no family, because he was already seen as an outsider, because he had nothing to lose. The words were not meant to insult, but they carried weight anyway. That night, the gunslinger walked for a long time. The road stretched ahead, empty and quiet. He asked himself hard questions. He did not believe in happy endings. He did not believe he could offer anyone a better life. He assumed the marriage would be cold, distant, and temporary. Two strangers sharing space, nothing more. But he also knew what it meant to be alone, completely alone, with no one willing to stand beside you. He knew what it felt like to be dismissed before you even spoke. The next day, he agreed. The meeting was arranged simply. No celebration, no crowd. Just a few witnesses and quiet words. The woman stood across from him. Up close, he could see lines of tiredness around her eyes, but also strength. She met his gaze without lowering her head. There was no gratitude, no fear, just understanding. They exchanged names. Their voices were calm. When the agreement was finalized, the coin changed hands, more a formality than anything real. The town quickly lost interest. People moved on to the next piece of news, the next problem to solve. That evening, they walked to his home together. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. He showed her the small space, explained where things were, and made it clear she could use what she needed. There were no promises spoken. No expectations set beyond basic respect. She thanked him simply. Not with emotion, but with sincerity. That first night they slept in separate spaces. The house was quiet except for the wind outside. The gunslinger lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He told himself this changed nothing. His life was still the same. He would continue his work. She would live there. They would not interfere with each other. Yet deep down, something had already shifted. For the first time in many years, his house did not feel completely empty. Not full, not warm, but no longer hollow. He did not know it then, but this small decision, made without hope or expectation, had placed the first stone on a path that would slowly reshape both their lives. The days after the marriage passed quietly, almost too quietly. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden changes. Life continued as it always had, moving forward one ordinary moment at a time. That was exactly what both of them expected. The woman woke early each morning. At first, she waited to be told what to do, unsure of her place in the house. The gunslinger noticed this but said nothing. He believed people needed space to find their own rhythm. After a few days, she began helping without being asked. She cleaned, cooked simple meals, and repaired small things around the house with careful hands. She did everything with focus, never rushing, never complaining. He watched from a distance. He was not used to sharing space. Every sound felt louder than before, the clink of a cup, footsteps on the wooden floor, the soft opening of a door. Yet none of it annoyed him. It was simply unfamiliar, like wearing new boots that had not yet softened. They spoke very little at first. When they did, their words were practical. He explained where tools were kept when he would be gone for work, and which paths were safest to walk. She listened carefully, remembering everything. When she spoke, her voice was calm and steady. She never asked personal questions. She never tried to impress him. The town, however, did not stay silent. People watched closely. They expected problems, arguments, or failure. Some whispered that the arrangement would not last. Others assumed the woman would leave once she found a better option. A few believed the gunslinger would regret his choice. Neither of them reacted. They had both learned that the opinions of others rarely helped. As weeks passed, small routines formed. They ate meals at the same table, though often in silence. He worked during the day, repairing fences, tools, and buildings. She sometimes accompanied him to town, standing quietly nearby while he worked. People stared less over time. Familiarity replaced curiosity. At night, they sat outside the house, watching the sky darken. Sometimes he smoked in silence. Sometimes she stitched torn clothes by lantern light. Words were not needed. The quiet felt safe. Slowly, he began to notice things about her. She rose even before sunrise, no matter how tired she was. She never wasted food. She treated every object with care, as if nothing could be replaced easily. When she laughed, which was rare, it was soft and brief, like she was surprised by it herself. One evening, while preparing dinner, she burned her hand slightly on the cooking pot. He noticed her wince but continue working. Without thinking, he reached out, gently pulling her hand away from the heat. He brought water and cloth, treating the small injury carefully. For a moment their eyes met. There was no fear in hers, only surprise and something else he could not name. He stepped back quickly, clearing his throat, unsure why his heart had begun to beat faster. After that, things changed little by little. They began to talk more. Not about the past, but about simple things. Weather, work, food. Sometimes she asked about the land, the seasons, how long he had lived there. He answered honestly but briefly. He did not know how to explain the parts of his life filled with loss and regret. He did not think she needed to carry that weight. One night she surprised him by speaking about her own past. Not details, just fragments. Long journeys, hard work, being judged unfairly, being told what she could not be. Her words were calm, but he could hear the strength behind them. He did not interrupt. He did not offer advice. He simply listened. From that night on, respect replaced distance. The town noticed the change before either of them did. People saw how she walked beside him, not behind. How he waited for her without realizing it. How his expression softened when he returned home. Still, neither of them expected more from life. They did not speak of the future. They did not make plans. They believed peace was temporary, something to be appreciated but not trusted. Then, one morning, the woman did not wake early. At first, he thought nothing of it. Everyone grew tired sometimes. But when she missed breakfast and remained in her room, concern crept in. He knocked gently, asking if she was well. She answered quietly, saying she felt unwell, dizzy, tired in a way she had not felt before. Days passed and the feeling did not fade. She ate less. She rested more. At first, she dismissed it as exhaustion. He wanted to believe that too, but something deep inside him felt uneasy. Eventually, they visited the town's healer. The woman sat calmly while questions were asked. The gunslinger stood nearby, arms crossed, unsure why his chest felt tight. When the healer spoke, the room seemed to grow very still. The words were simple, almost casual. The woman was expecting a child. For a long moment, no one spoke. The woman's expression did not change at first. Then her eyes widened slightly, as if her mind was struggling to accept what her ears had heard. The gunslinger felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. The label that had followed her for years, spoken as truth by so many, crumbled in an instant. They walked home in silence. The road felt longer than usual. Each step carried weight neither of them had prepared for. That night, they sat across from each other, the lantern flickering between them. Finally, she spoke. "I was told this was not possible," she said quietly. "So was I," he replied, though he was not sure what he meant. Fear arrived before joy. Fear of change, fear of responsibility, fear of loss. He had lived too long believing good things did not last. The thought of something precious entering his life terrified him. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something warm and unfamiliar. Hope. In the following weeks, reality settled in. The woman grew tired easily. He adjusted his work schedule without realizing it, coming home earlier, carrying heavier loads so she would not have to. He listened more closely, watched more carefully. The town reacted with disbelief. Whispers returned, louder than before. Some doubted the truth. Others mocked the situation. A few congratulated them, unsure how else to respond. The woman ignored it all. She focused on her health, on the quiet changes within her body. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by failure. The gunslinger struggled more. At night, he lay awake, thinking of his past and wondering if it would return to harm what he was beginning to care for. He questioned whether he deserved this chance, whether he could protect what he had never planned to have. One evening, as they sat together outside, she placed a hand gently on her stomach. The gesture was small, almost unconscious. He watched, feeling something tighten in his chest. "I don't know what kind of father I would be," he said quietly. She looked at him then, really looked at him. "You already protect," she said. "That is a beginning." Her words stayed with him long after the lantern was extinguished. Neither of them said it out loud, but both understood. Their lives were no longer moving on separate paths. Something unexpected had joined them, not just to each other, but to a future neither had dared to believe in. And though fear still lingered, it no longer stood alone. Hope had found a place beside it. The months that followed moved slowly, yet everything felt different. The woman's body changed little by little, and with each change, reality became harder to ignore. This was not a rumor or a mistake. A new life was growing, quietly but surely. The gunslinger found himself paying attention to details he had once ignored. He noticed when she looked tired before she spoke. He learned which foods made her feel better and which smells bothered her. Without discussing it, he began bringing home small things from town: fresh fruit, warm bread, herbs suggested by the healer. He never announced these actions. He simply placed them on the table and went about his day. She noticed, of course. She noticed everything, but she did not thank him repeatedly or make a show of it. She accepted his care with calm dignity, as if this quiet partnership had always been meant to exist. Their conversations changed too. They spoke more often in the evenings, sitting side by side instead of across from each other. Sometimes they talked about practical matters, how to prepare for winter, how much money they needed to save. Other times they spoke about nothing important at all. The sound of his voice, steady and low, became familiar to her. The sound of her quiet laughter surprised him every time. The town remained divided. Some people softened toward them, offering advice or small gifts. Others stayed suspicious, waiting for something to go wrong. The gunslinger no longer cared as much. His focus had shifted inward, toward the home he had once thought of as temporary. As the pregnancy progressed, fear returned in waves. Some nights, the woman lay awake, staring at the ceiling, worried that something might suddenly change. Old voices from her past echoed in her mind, reminding her of all the times she had been told she was broken. On those nights, the gunslinger often sensed her restlessness even without words. He would sit nearby, saying nothing, his presence steady. It helped more than reassurance ever could. When the time came, the birth was difficult but successful. The first cry filled the small house, sharp and loud, breaking years of silence. The gunslinger stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do, overwhelmed by the sound. When the healer placed the baby in his arms, his hands trembled. The child was small, warm, and very real. In that moment, something inside him shifted completely. All the fear he had carried, the belief that he was only capable of harm, that his past defined him, began to loosen its grip. He looked down at the child and felt a fierce need to protect, stronger than anything he had ever known. The woman watched him quietly, exhaustion on her face, relief and wonder in her eyes. She had survived many things in her life, but this felt like the greatest victory of all. The town reacted with shock and fascination. A child born where none was expected. A family formed from an arrangement no one believed in. People came to look, some out of curiosity, others out of genuine kindness. Slowly, the story changed in people's mouths. What had once been spoken with doubt was now told with amazement. Life did not suddenly become easy. Nights were long. Work was harder. Sleep came in short pieces. but something had been added to their lives that made the effort feel worthwhile. The gunslinger learned to carry the child, to calm them when they cried, to walk the floor late at night when nothing else worked. He made mistakes, plenty of them, but he learned quickly. Each small success filled him with a quiet pride he had never known before. The woman recovered slowly, her strength returning day by day. She watched him with the child and felt something warm settle in her chest. This was not the life she had imagined, but it was more than she had ever been promised. Time moved forward. Before they fully realized it, she was expecting again. The news was met with silence at first, then a shared look of disbelief. This time the fear was mixed with laughter, not because they were careless, but because the impossible had already happened once. Now it was happening again. The second child arrived more smoothly than the first. Then, after a short time, a third. The house grew louder, fuller, messier. Each child brought new challenges and new joy. The gunslinger worked harder than ever, taking on extra jobs, learning new skills. His hands grew rougher, his body more tired, but his spirit felt stronger. The woman managed the home with quiet strength. She taught the children patience and kindness, using simple lessons and steady care. She rarely raised her voice. When she did, it carried weight. People in the town no longer spoke of her as the woman who was judged and dismissed. They spoke of her as a mother, capable and resilient. The label that had once defined her faded into irrelevance. The gunslinger, too, was seen differently. He still carried his past, but it no longer stood alone. He was now a father, a provider, someone others looked to for help and advice. Children followed him through the streets, asking questions, laughing at his serious expressions. Some nights after the children slept, he and the woman sat together, exhausted but content. They did not speak of fate or miracles. They spoke of tomorrow, of school, of work, of small hopes. Years passed this way, one season blending into the next. Each new child arrived with surprise but not disbelief. By the time the sixth was born, the house felt almost too small to hold all the life inside it. 8 years after that first unexpected moment, the gunslinger stood outside the house one evening, watching his children play. Their laughter filled the air, loud and unrestrained. The woman stood nearby, arms crossed, watching them with a soft smile. He realized then that his life had changed completely, not through force or ambition, but through quiet choices made without expectation. What had begun as a practical arrangement had become something solid and real. The woman joined him, their shoulders touching. No words were needed. The past still existed, but it no longer controlled them. They had built something stronger than labels, stronger than doubt. A life shaped not by what others believed, but by what they had proven, one ordinary day at a time. As the years continued, life grew fuller and heavier at the same time. With each new child, joy increased, but so did responsibility. The house that once felt empty now overflowed with sound, movement, and constant activity. Mornings began before sunrise and ended long after dark. There was always something to fix, someone to feed, or a small problem waiting to be solved. The gunslinger's days were longer than ever. He woke early to work in the fields, repair buildings, or take jobs in nearby areas. He no longer worked only for survival. Now he worked with purpose. Every board he fixed, every fence he repaired carried meaning. It meant food on the table, warm clothes for winter, and safety for the people who depended on him. His body felt the strain. Some evenings his hands shook from exhaustion. His back ached in ways it never had before. Yet when he stepped through the door and heard his children's voices, the tiredness softened. They ran toward him, talking all at once, each eager to be seen and heard. In those moments, the weight of the day lifted. The woman managed the household with quiet strength. She did not complain, even when the work felt endless. She organized the home with care, teaching the older children to help the younger ones. She showed them how to clean, cook simple meals, and treat each other kindly. Discipline was firm but gentle. She believed children learned best through example. There were difficult days, days when food ran low, days when sickness moved through the house, one child after another, nights when no one slept well and patience wore thin. On those days, fear tried to return. The woman worried about the future. The gunslinger worried about failing the people who trusted him. But they faced these worries together, even when they did not speak about them directly. A shared glance, a quiet nod, a hand resting briefly on the other's shoulder. These small gestures carried more meaning than long conversations ever could. The town's attitude continued to change. Where once there had been whispers, there was now respect. People saw how the family worked together, how the children were cared for, how the woman stood tall despite her past. Neighbors began to offer help without being asked. Someone brought extra grain. Another offered used clothes. These were small acts, but they mattered. The children grew quickly. The oldest began helping their father with simple tasks, learning how to hold tools and understand responsibility. The younger ones followed behind, curious and eager. The house echoed with laughter, arguments, questions, and stories told at night before sleep. The gunslinger learned patience in ways his past life had never required. He learned to explain instead of command, to listen instead of react. He made mistakes, sometimes raising his voice when he was too tired. When that happened, he apologized. This was new for him, admitting fault without feeling weak. The woman noticed this change and felt something steady grow between them. What they shared was not loud or dramatic. It was built from trust, shared effort, and countless ordinary moments. They did not call it love, but it shaped their lives all the same. There were moments when the past tried to pull them back. Once, a man from the gunslinger's earlier life appeared in town, bringing with him old stories and unwanted memories. Fear returned sharply then. The woman saw the tension in her husband's posture, the way his eyes scanned the area even at home. That night he finally spoke about parts of his past he had kept buried. Not all details, but enough for her to understand the weight he carried. He expected judgment. Instead, she listened quietly, then reminded him of who he was now. "You are not that man anymore," she said simply. "You choose every day." Her words grounded him. The visitor left town soon after, and with him went a piece of the fear that had followed the gunslinger for years. As time passed, the woman gave birth to her sixth child. By then the town was no longer shocked. Instead, there was celebration. The healer smiled, neighbors helped prepare food, and the house filled with warmth and support. The woman recovered slowly but steadily, surrounded by children who already understood care and responsibility beyond their years. The house was crowded, but it was alive. Every corner held a story. Every mark on the wall showed growth. The gunslinger sometimes stood quietly, watching it all, wondering how his life had turned so completely. There were sacrifices. Personal dreams were set aside. Free time became rare, yet neither of them felt regret. What they had built was real, shaped by effort and choice, not chance. 8 years passed like this, fast and slow at the same time. The children grew stronger. The family grew closer. Hardship still existed, but it no longer felt unbearable. They had learned how to endure together. One evening, after a long day, the gunslinger sat outside, listening to the familiar sounds of home behind him. The woman joined him, sitting close. The sky was clear, filled with stars. "We survived," he said quietly. She nodded. "And we are still here." They sat in silence, surrounded by the proof of everything the world had once said was impossible, not because life had been kind, but because they had chosen to keep going. What began as a quiet agreement had become a life built on strength, resilience, and trust, one ordinary day at a time. Time has a quiet way of moving forward. One day blends into the next, and before anyone notices, years have passed. The children who once clung to their parents' legs now ran freely through the fields and streets. Their voices carried far, full of energy and confidence. The house that once felt too small now felt just right, shaped by life and laughter. The gunslinger was no longer known by that name in the town. People now called him a father, a worker, a man who could be trusted. When someone needed help fixing a roof or solving a problem, they came to him. His past still existed, but it no longer defined him. What mattered was who he had become through his choices. He often thought about how close he had come to living a very different life. If he had said no that day, if he had turned away like everyone else, his world would have remained quiet and empty. The thought humbled him. It reminded him that the most important moments in life did not always arrive with noise or excitement. Sometimes they arrived quietly, disguised as ordinary decisions. The woman had changed too, though her strength had always been there. She stood taller now, not because of pride, but because she knew her worth. The label that once followed her had completely disappeared. No one spoke of it anymore. In its place was respect. People sought her advice. Other women asked how she managed such a large household with calm and balance. She never spoke bitterly about the past. She believed that holding on to anger only made the present heavier. Instead, she focused on what she could build, not what had been taken from her. Her children learned this lesson early. When they struggled or failed, she reminded them that mistakes were not endings, only lessons. The children grew into individuals with their own thoughts and dreams. Each was different, yet they shared a strong bond. They defended one another, helped one another, and learned the value of cooperation. They understood early that family was not just about living under the same roof, but about standing together when things were hard. The oldest child took on responsibility with seriousness beyond their years. They helped guide the younger ones, learning patience and leadership. The middle children brought laughter and curiosity, always asking questions about the world. The youngest was watched carefully by everyone, protected and loved in equal measure. Even with all the noise and movement, there were quiet moments. Early mornings before the house woke, the gunslinger sometimes sat alone, watching the sun rise. In those moments, he reflected on how much had changed. He no longer felt fear when he thought about the future. There were worries, of course, but they were shared worries, faced together. The woman joined him during those mornings when she could. They spoke about small things, what needed to be done that day, which child needed extra attention, what supplies were running low. These conversations were simple, but they were full of trust. They did not need grand words to understand each other. The town itself had changed over the years. New families arrived, old ones moved on, but the story of this household stayed, not as gossip but as something people quietly respected. It became a reminder that first impressions were often wrong, and that human lives could not be measured by a single judgment. Sometimes, newcomers heard the story and shook their heads in disbelief. They expected drama or exaggeration. Instead, they found a family living an ordinary life, shaped by effort and care. That was the truth of it, nothing magical, nothing perfect, just people choosing to show up for one another every day. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the gunslinger looked around the table. The children talked over one another, sharing stories from their day. The woman moved calmly, serving food, listening with a soft smile. In that moment, he felt something close to gratitude, not loud or overwhelming, but steady and deep. He realized that happiness had not arrived all at once. It had grown slowly, built from routine, responsibility, and forgiveness. It was found in small victories, a repaired fence, a healed illness, a shared meal after a long day. The woman felt it too. She often thought about how easily her life could have gone another way, how close she had come to believing the world's judgment of her. Now, when she looked at her children, she saw proof that those judgments had never been true. Her life was not defined by what others said, but by what she lived. As the years continued, the children began to imagine futures of their own. Some spoke of staying close, helping the family. Others dreamed of traveling or learning trades. Their parents did not discourage them. They believed that strength meant allowing growth, even when it meant letting go. The gunslinger taught his children about responsibility, honesty, and restraint. He did not hide his past completely, but he spoke of it carefully, focusing on lessons rather than regret. He wanted them to understand that people could change, but only through effort and accountability. The woman taught them kindness, patience, and self-respect. She reminded them that their value did not come from approval, but from character. These lessons became part of the family's foundation, passed quietly from one generation to the next. There were still hard days. Loss visited the town, as it always does. Seasons of scarcity returned now and then, but the family faced these challenges with resilience. They had learned how to endure without losing themselves. One night long after the children were asleep, the gunslinger and the woman sat together outside. The air was cool, the sky clear. The stars felt closer than usual. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked. She nodded. "Sometimes. I didn't expect any of this," he admitted. "Neither did I," she replied. They shared a quiet smile, not because everything had been easy, but because it had been real. Their story did not end with celebration or grand recognition. It continued the way most true stories do, through ordinary days, shared effort, and steady love. What the world had once dismissed had grown into something strong and lasting. In the end, their lives became a reminder that people are more than labels, more than rumors, more than their past. Sometimes, the smallest beginning leads to the richest life, not through luck, but through courage, patience, and the willingness to see value where others do not. And that was how their story lived on, not as a legend but as proof.